so I think we're ready to go. So we have 4 videos that I asked you to watch for class today, right? There was the question of Samsung and marketing of cell phones in third world countries, specifically India, where we find that 4 billion people on the earth have cell phones. No, 6 billion have cell phones, 4.5 have working toilets or latrines. And what is the ethical question? What is the debate that we're talking about here?
Is it ethical to market cell phones to a place where they don't even have their basic sanitary needs?
Okay, so that's our first area. Second one had to do with what? The captive customer, which was about the University of Alabama, and the student who has to take a writing class and is required to purchase what? The custom textbook. The assessment of this custom textbook is that it was $6 more expensive to buy the custom textbook than the regular version of the textbook.
And they couldn't buy it used.
Could not buy it used, right? You had to buy the new version. And what did I get for the $6 of paying for the new version?
A couple extra pages and a fancy cover.
And a fancy cover that said, hey, don't forget you go to the University of Alabama. Because evidently the fact that she was wearing the marching band outfit didn't already remind her of that fact. Okay, so what is the ethical question that we're debating there? The question of kickbacks. The fact was that, why was this a big deal?
This college that was, like the writing college, was getting kickbacks from the book.
Well, here's the problem with that. The definition of a kickback is an illegal compensation for receiving commerce. Okay, was this illegal?
No.
No. So I take just a little exception to the terminology, but this concept of, is there a conflict of interest in this case? Okay, and that's where things get a little bit sketchier. Okay, all right. What's the next one? Cooking a resume. What was this one about?
Dude that lied on his resume for his cooking show.
Just about everything on his resume was a lie. Okay, I take it back. He picked out some of the fruit that went on their wedding cake. And he did get his 5 diamond award from some guy who ran his business out of his apartment. And as long as you paid the fee, you were a 5 diamond award winner. I take it back. He did not lie on everything. He just misrepresented everything. Okay, what's the ethical challenge or question there?
Is it ethical to lie or exaggerate your resume?
Okay. Is it ethical to exaggerate? Okay. And then the last one, the rank and yank. Where does this one come from?
The ranking of your employees and then firing the bottom 10% and promoting the top 20%.
Okay. This came from General Electric, which used to be a big manufacturer, but now has moved kind of into business consulting. Okay. And the CEO of GE said that the reality is, if we look at just statistical performance, 80% of your productivity comes from what? 20% of your employees. 20% of your employees are responsible for 80% of your productivity. Okay, so what was his argument or justification?
That's not about getting rid of the bottom 10%, it's about boosting the top 20%. So.
Okay, so the idea is that first of all, we have to compensate that top 20%. a lot of the compensation for that top 20 comes from getting rid of the bottom 10. Okay, at the very end, they spent a lot of time talking. The competition to get that top 20% at any company is incredibly fierce because they recognize you get one of those top 20s, holy cow, they are going to drive sales, drive productivity, drive whatever it is you're doing. And the hope is that by constantly having turnover, what are we hoping to find?
People that can work their way up to the top.
People that will eventually make it up to that top 20%. And so we have to leave space to constantly be getting that. It's kind of scary for the bottom. Actually, I would say that the scariest part is for the, not the bottom 10, but the bottom 11. The ones who realize that I just missed the sickle this year. They're probably coming for me next year, right? They talked about, I don't know if any of you, they would put up those articles, but they put them up so fast you couldn't really read them. So I found myself rewinding and pausing just so that I could read some of the stuff that they were talking about. And they talked about the concept of drowning your competition. Did anybody stop and see that one? A common practice is that managers would go and continually push their competitors and say, look, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, to get them to overcommit or underperform so that they would get kicked out and I could steal their employees and find the 20%ers in their groups. You laugh, but at large companies, this kind of stuff happens. All right, so I want to spend a lot more time talking about these, but I just wanted to kind of review them. So, Jared Harrison, can you explain to us the one thing that I asked you guys to come ready to do was the 3 C's. So let's talk about the first C. Can you explain to us what that first C is? Mr. Harrison. Okay, Mr. Vaughn.
Is it conclusion? Is that one of the 3 C's?
That's one of, well, kind of, it's a choice, but right there on the screen, we see number 1.
Characterize.
Okay, characterizing the situation. What does that mean? What does it mean to characterize the situation?
Basically classify it on how you're going to classify it. You know how to.
Okay, well, let's look at those 3 bullet points that are connected to this idea of characterizing the situation. Brian, you want to help him out?
Characterize want to be like let's see how I put this. Like characterize, like look at the. How do you put this on? Give me a second. I had it in my head. Like set up the available the necessary information and go through it and I don't know. I got lost.
Okay, so basically what we've just been doing for about the last 15 minutes is we're basically just saying kind of what's going on in each of these situations, right? What's the situation? Well, they're forcing me to buy a textbook that doesn't have a lot of new information in it, but they're forcing me to buy a new copy, which is incredibly expensive, and I find out that they get a portion of the cost for me having to buy this brand new book. Okay? Do we know everything that's going on? Well, for example, in the textbook situation, I would want to know, well, if they're asking you to buy a specialized edition, what's in the specialized edition? And what did they say? Well, it's a description of the writing program at Alabama, and all of that information is available for free online. But hey, you get this nifty cover that says the University of Alabama. I got to be honest, a big red, white, and blue A is not necessarily the coolest mascot. Okay, I mean, if you had this stampeding elephant raging across the front of the cover, maybe we could talk. But from the version that they saw, it was a very tame University of Alabama across the top. So do we have all the information we need to understand about why this is happening? Okay, it would be nice if we understood what that money that was being collected for the university was being used for. They actually provided information in the articles if you went through and looked at the questions at the very end of that video. Does anybody know what the university was using that money for?
Went back to the English department.
It does go back to the English department. Sorry.
Retreat for the English department?
It pays for a retreat. Now, normally when we hear the word a corporate retreat, what do we picture in our heads? They're going to some conference center with spas and they're going to play golf and things like that. Is that the kind of corporate retreat or faculty retreat we are talking about in this particular case? I'm going to tell you right now, having gone to some of these, the answer is heck no. Okay? You're sitting in classrooms like the one we're in right now with people standing up and droning on about research that they've done in the field of composition. Okay? These tend to be highly technical conferences offered by the department specifically to improve the quality of first year and graduate students who are teaching these courses. Why would graduate students want to go to these things? Because trust me, there's no perks or frills at one of these corporate retreats. So why would they want to go? Okay, since I've been to one, I can speak to this. They go because, first of all, they want to be seen by the movers and shakers in the department. Because at some point, what's going to happen? If they're graduate students, hopefully at some point, what will happen?
They need to get research.
Well, they're going to hope to do research and they're going to at some point graduate, right? They're graduate students, but they want to graduate. And once they graduate, what are they going to probably want to do? Get a job teaching. So they've got to go and try to impress the people that run these conferences that, yes, I'm somebody you should hire, and if you don't want to hire me here, will you write me the kind of recommendation that will give me a job someplace else? Okay, so the $3 that the department gets, right? They said that they get half of the $6, right? So the $3 that they get, they have 4,000 students that have to buy this textbook, means how much money are they getting from this textbook? Quick math. 12,000 bucks. Okay? Is this a massive criminal undertaking? Not really. Okay? It's basically enough to pay to host a conference every year to get these graduate students and things like that. Is that an ethical benefit? Can I show benefit to, well, we'll get into that. Okay? But that's when we're talking about characterizing. What do we know? What do we understand? What issues are involved? Okay? So I'm going to have you guys, when I break you up into groups, I'm going to break you up into groups to discuss one of these videos. Okay? We've already kind of done the characterizing. Okay? What's the next one? Sierra. Number 2. What's number 2?
Considering the ethical options for the situation.
Okay, and specifically, what are you supposed to do in this particular section? Two things.
Think of all the wrong choices and all the right choices, possible right choices.
Okay, look at all the potential choices of how I would solve this and break them into two groups, right? What groups are those? Daniel?
Ethically right and ethically wrong.
Okay, so when I break those into the obvious right and the obvious wrong, what should I do as a part of that? I've categorized them as being right or wrong, but what else do I have to do, Deanne? Is it enough just to put them in the category?
You want to analyze how they're right or wrong and look at maybe the solutions to right or wrong?
Okay, in this particular case, my big focus is simply, it's not enough just to say that's right and this is wrong. I have to give some kind of explanation or justification. What is it that makes it right? What is it that makes it wrong? Okay, and then finally, Mr. Monson, what is number 3?
He put it in the comments, Professor.
Oh, thank you. Choosing the best course of action. What does that mean? Jesus, what does it mean to choose the best course of action? What do I put? What do I cover or discuss in that section?
Like to choose which choices are, like, which ones are the best ethical right types of actions.
Okay, exactly. So we're going to take all those actions and we're going to go through that filter, right? Now, we talked about this back in chapter, was it chapter 4? That there was this idea of, okay, we have all these ethical models, right? We've got utilitarianism. We've got a consideration of rights. We've got a consideration of justice. We've got a consideration of care, right? How do we decide which model to use? Where do we start?
Looking at the foundations themselves.
What's that? Say it one more time, sorry.
You have to look at the foundations themselves or the principles. So like if we're looking at it from a utilitarian perspective, you have to see if it weighs or if the benefits outweigh the burden. Then if you look at it from the justice perspective, you have to make sure that justice is being served, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. Right, so the book, if I recall correctly, said of the 4, which one is at the bottom? The last one to talk about. Utilitarianism. Okay, so let's ask the question. Let me actually do this on the screen so that we can see what we're talking about. Okay, so we've got utility. Okay, so if we were to put these in order of first to last, the last question we ask is what? Utility, right? Why is utility last?
It's very broad, it's kind of a catch-all.
And it's really concerned primarily about society as a whole. It is not supposed to look at what? It is not supposed to consider the needs of individuals. It is all about society. Okay? So Spock, sitting in the warp core reactor thing, and I'm talking about Wrath of Khan here, I'm not messing with the new stuff. Okay? But Spock says the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Okay? He says this as he's dying of radiation poisoning. Okay? But it's because it is such a broad scope, the authors are suggesting we should not start there. We should finish there. So let me ask you the question, why? This is critical. Okay.
I
Go
think
for it.
the other ethical standards gives an idea of those benefits, and gradually working our way to utilitarianism kind of sums it all up to know the
Okay.
benefits and the cost.
Okay, Justin?
I think it's because oftentimes if you look purely at utilitarianism, it can compromise a lot of the other ethical standards.
Okay. Very few of us live in a world where we honestly can say everything I do is done because I am thinking about the good of humanity. Very few of us can say every single decision. Should I order the Big Mac today? I do not consider its societal cost when I buy that for lunch. Would you agree with me? Okay, that's what they're saying. That's why utility is at the very end, because it normally doesn't color our decisions. Therefore, we have to be honest with ourselves about how we actually make decisions. Does this make sense? Okay, so that being the case, if utility is at the very last, what comes next? What is number 3? I put these in random order, so these are not in the order they need to be in necessarily. Okay, why justice? Anybody?
I think it's a broader scope than care and rights, because you're distributing burdens and benefits as a whole.
Okay, so I'm still not looking at individuals, I'm looking at groups, but I'm looking at how things are distributed across that group. But I'm still not necessarily concerned about the individual as opposed to a group in a larger group. Okay, so justice in terms of scope is smaller than utility, because I do care about groups within the society. Okay? But I still haven't burrowed down to the individual. Where does that really start to show up? At rights. Okay? So we have to decide which is the ultimate pinnacle, care or rights. I would argue that care goes first. Why?
Because it's more specifically aimed at an individual. Rights can be looked at a group of people who are basically like rights and justice, but care is very specific with your relationships with an individual.
That's it. Okay? The idea of care is it's about my personal relationships with other people. Okay, so I'm going to pick on Gerardo for a minute. I don't think he's here, unfortunately, but in his case study, he spoke about a coaching decision where the coach has to decide whether to put in a star quarterback that was brought in primarily for that purpose, or his own son, who has slightly less capacity, but an equally high capacity of leading the team to victory. And so one of the very first things that Gerardo identifies is the coach has to decide whether or not his own feelings for his son should be relevant to the discussion. That immediately goes to an ethic of care, right? This is the most personal, the most immediate, the most relevant to us. This tends to influence our decisions more than just about anything else, right? The very first question we normally ask in any given situation is, how will it affect me and those that I care about? Why it's up at the top? We have to work that out. Why? Why is that the first thing we should probably try to figure out?
most impact to us?
It will probably have the most immediate and the most powerful impact on us, right? Doing things that hurt my wife or hurt my kids are going to be a lot more important to me than things that perhaps hurt other employees at the university or people in Pocatello or the United States or the world. I don't know everybody in the world, but I know my wife and kids, right? Okay, so having identified these 4 things and putting them in this order, what does that have to do with the question that we're talking about? Hold on just a second. How does that have anything to do with this choose option?
Likely the one that maximizes ethical stance from care will be the best.
Well, but does it, well, I start at which one is going to best satisfy care. Do I just, is that where I stop? I need to look at, okay, if this is the best one at this level, how does it perform at the next level? All the way through. And then I compare all of those. So I don't just stop at the one that is the best for my personal relationships, right? That really suggests, I mean, if that's how we did everything, then everything would be incredibly selfish, right? Because all we would care about is the people that are closest to me, the most of which is myself, right? I have to do what's right for me. That is at the heart of an ethic of care, isn't it? So it can be incredibly corrupted if I looked at it just from that scope. So that's why I go into the other ones. But I have to be clear as to how it affects me first, because realistically, that's how we make decisions, right? Okay, so what is my point in doing all of this, Mr. Lambert? We covered this ad nauseum a couple of weeks ago. So why go over it again right here? Okay, what am I asking you to do in this situation, right? I'm going to give you one of those case studies. This is how I'm going to ask you to respond in the final. Your response should identify these 3 things. So this is practice for the final exam. Okay? Is everybody cool with that? Okay, so basically, just so that I'm being as open and honest as I can be, if you haven't already looked at it yet, here's what your final exam is going to be. You are going to have 2 short answer and 2 longer answer responses. Your final exam will open on Monday. It will be open until Sunday. Okay, so November 30th is Monday. It is open until December 6th. Am I correct on those dates? Making sure. Okay, so you are going to have 6 days. Depends on how you do your math. I gotta be honest with you, days of the week are always kind of sketchy for me. Okay, 6 days?
Yeah.
Okay. It is going to be open book, open notes. Okay? For the short essay question, let me actually make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. This is on the website. This is in Moodle. Okay? For the short essay questions, you will be asked to briefly explain in your own words an ethical theory and show how it applies in a given situation that I have already written up. Okay? So subtle hint, there's 4 of them. There's various flavors of those 4. Actually, technically, if you want to be, we talked about a 5th. Why don't we talk about, what is the 5th? We talked about ethic of care, rights, justice, utilitarianism. What's the fifth? An ethic of virtue. Why don't we talk about that one the same way as we talk about the other four? Liam, what do you think? Why don't we talk about ethic of virtue the same way that we talk about, for example, the ethic of care or justice or utilitarianism?
He's not online.
Oh, he's not online anymore. Okay. Josh, what about you? What do you think?
Is it because virtue has to be more like our past?
Okay.
That we've gone through, and then care is, I don't know, like all these ones are ones we can apply to future.
Okay. The ethic of virtue is really focused on who we are, our character. And so it doesn't necessarily point to specific decisions, right? It's the net result of all of the decisions we have made up to that point. So it doesn't give us as much of an as much of an instantaneous guide as the other four do in how do I decide in this case what to do, right? It's more focused on who we are than what we do. And I know that sounds kind of strange. So that's why we normally don't talk about that one as much. All right? So anyway, so for the short essay questions, you're going to have two of those. I'm going to ask you to define an ethical model or an ethical stance and how it would apply in a specific situation. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. For the longer scenarios, you'll be asked to do the following. You'll be given 3 scenarios. You'll pick how many of them? 2. For those 2, you are going to write a response. Your response should identify these 3 things. You should characterize the situation. Identify what the real problem is. What is the ethical concern of that situation? Who's involved with it? Okay. Number 2, based on that, identify what possible options you have and whether they are ethically right or wrong. And then finally, carry out the chosen action. What would I actually do in this case? How do I defend that? Okay, does that make sense? Your responses should be about 500 to 700 words per scenario. So this is not going to be a short, hey, just sit down and just kind of flip something out. Okay? That's why I'm giving you a fairly long period of time.
Is there a number of words for the short responses too?
500 to 700 words per scenario. So you're going to have 4 scenarios that you write up. So 500 to 700 words for each of the 4 things.
Outside resources, or is it just
Nope.
all purely what we think?
It's all what you think, what you remember, what you know. Okay? All right. So, having said that, so my goal is, what I want you to think about is those 3 things. Characterize, consider, and choose. Okay? I'm going to put you into some groups now. The group that's here in class is going to be one group. Let's see, we have, let's see. Wow, wait a second. There were more people online at the beginning of this class, wasn't there?
There was 11 of us.
I get this impression that people are logging in, they see that I see them, I mark for attendance, and then they disappear. The irony of that in an ethics class should be palpable to most of us. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna basically put everybody in this room in one group and everybody online in the other group, okay? The people online, I would like you to discuss, I'm trying to remember the textbook, the captive choice, so the textbook, and then the rank and yank model. So the second and fourth videos. Okay? What I'd like you to do is to spend some time debating the 3 C's of those 2 videos. Okay? I'm going to give you about half an hour. And what I want you to do is to have something as if those 2 videos were the scenarios you were given. How would you answer those? You get to work in a group on this. Does that make sense to everybody? We're going to spend about the last 10 minutes of class going over your findings. So the people in class, you're going to be doing number 1, which is the cell phones and toilets, and then Robert Irvine and the resume. Is everybody good with that? Any questions?
Nope.
Okay. Can you give them a second to move in? Okay, Daniel, they're waiting on you. Looks like that's frozen, so I'm going to assume that that works. Perfect. All right. Okay, so you guys get the benefit of okay, I'll move that out of the way. Okay, so there's the 4 C's here. Okay.
That's the final one.
Right, that's the final. I had asked you just to do 1 through 3. In fact, I'll probably get rid of the 4 for class, with the application one. So, all right, so let's go, let's start with the first one. This is your time, I'm gonna shut up.
Okay, so first one was cell phones, right? Yeah, so first thing, to categorize it, what's the essential problem? I think the essential problem is why, the first thing is they kind of assume that advertising is manipulation, which I believe does have some merit. Advertising is designed to be manipulation. Is there any debate with that?
To an extent, yeah, I agree.
Okay. And then they're saying, why are they manipulating people? Well, I say we just stick with India, just to keep the scale of the same state. Why are they manipulating people in India to buy a phone over a toilet? And so I'd say that'd be the basic of the categorizing. What you guys think?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I came up with sections, but the ethical question is like, is it ethical to market cell phones to people when they don't have this sanitary necessities? So I would say, like, is it okay to market a product like this when they need other things that improve the livelihood, improve their livelihood?
The one word I would change in that would be to say manipulative one.
Yes.
Do we get a scribe? Does anyone want to write anything down or just want to remember? I'm not going to have to, I was just throwing suggestions.
Good idea.
One of the main things that stuck out to me though was that this first one was it reminded me a lot of the argument of, well, there's children starving in Africa, where they're like, well, you keep doing this, but why aren't you helping out the children in Africa? That kind of same argument of like, well, here's a problem and you're not helping this problem in this country. That brings up the question is it the right of the company to worry about that? Because one of the main things I noticed in this commercial, it's, although it does, advertise to people, one of the main focuses on this commercial is against iPhone. Everything it does in the commercial is kind of combating iPhone. It's like, oh, you have 4G, we've had that for a while. Oh, we have, and it showed off a couple features, but it wasn't like, you guys should buy our product because you should buy our product. It's more, it's more of combating Apple, which brings up the, problem of they're fighting another company that's also doing it. And so if you keep following this, it'd be both companies are in the wrong, but that brings us back to the question is, how responsible is this country, how responsible are these companies for, providing, information about toilets?
I do think, I felt like that first video kind of had like two parts. Because like the first part was focusing on the Samsung versus iPhone. And then the second part, it sounded like they were talking about a different situation in which it was Samsung versus toilets in India, right? Because I don't think they were airing that commercial in India. Because that looked like it was an American commercial.
I thought so too.
So I'm not positive on that, but that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
But then also I agree with what you're saying. I don't think that the argument I'm trying to make is that the company should be responsible for getting toilets to people. But is it ethical for them to hard market into India or manipulatively market into it?
And so I guess we can move into the choices, right?
Yeah.
So write down the choices. So the first choice to hold them most ethically responsible, I'd say would be the companies have to at least, or one would be the companies stop advertising aggressively in there. Maybe not stop advertising entirely, but stop aggressively advertising in these more rural countries where one could argue, due to their poor education, could be much more manipulative than it should be. So that'd be one option.
Yeah, like some of the bad options I came up with was like completely stop selling cell phones in India. Technically it would fix the problem, but it would cause others, right? And then the other one was like stop all advertising. Like, I think advertisement in itself is not the problem, it's the manipulative advertisement that can be the problem.
But when does, and I think that's just the biggest problem with advertisement is,
That's a hard one.
yeah, because when does it stop being informative and start being manipulative?
Exactly.
Because,
And just by telling them about stuff on the phone, is that manipulating them? So how do you know to avoid it?
well, and then the last thing I have written here is, so, the whole advertisement, the problem is, so let's say they advertise toilets. Is that really gonna help the problem? Because the problem here is you have a device of pleasure versus a device of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
And that just goes back to the problem we talked about last the other day of, companies don't sell for necessity, they sell for what they want to sell. Or so people don't buy for what they need, they buy for what they want. That's a better way to word that. And so with them, let's say, Apple funds Apple and Samsung fund a campaign for toilet advertisements. Is that really gonna do anything?
Not really. Yeah, so see that was another thing that I talked about, like not looking from the perspective of the company, but like I was looking like any kind of perspective here, so like maybe the government or something, but changing the nature of the culture to put sanitation in a higher light. You know what I mean? There's a problem with that in a lot of cultures, and like I think America might be over sanitized culture, but it's I don't know where am I going with this? But it's like the culture differences, right? Where like we see that as having a huge problem, but for them it's normal. Like that's just normal everyday life. So maybe changing the culture could help with the sanitation issue, right? Like reducing those.
Yeah. And then that brings up the next question is the advertisement taking away, is the advertisement in a way of changing their culture, or is it just another side note in there? Because that's, because again, the closest example is like, well, there's children starving in Africa when you don't finish your food. Well, you're not finishing that food is not affecting that problem whatsoever. It's more, it's an excuse to blame someone over the problem. I feel like me and him are probably not. You guys don't understand?
I don't know, I just feel like it's not really the company's responsibility. Like, yeah, it is kind of manipulative, and maybe they should tone it down, but is it really their fault, people that are staying connected to each other and have a comfortable place to live in? Like, maybe, or maybe they're unaware of how much it is affecting them. Maybe there needs to be more awareness raised about how sanitation can affect them. But I don't know if it's really the cell phone's responsibility unless they back out.
That's just it, right? Like, it's like, yes, this is a problem, but also, is it the cell phone company's problem? They have.
And are they at fault at any point if what they're doing? And so I'd say, let's write down a couple of options here, just so we have something to say. Or you got something written down, let's say.
I haven't written here, but not on this paper. I can write down some more, more.
Yeah, we'll be up. Same page. So that's, and then it's choose. So what do we think is the best option? What I think is the best option is less aggressive selling and maybe like a minor like tax that goes towards promoting sanitation in the country, or promoting information.
Donate.
Yeah, like they should donate or like for advertising in the country, they're given an extra tax that goes towards informative, kind of like what you were saying is to inform the country of the need of sanitation.
So are we looking from the perspective of the company in general, like we're the company and deciding what we're doing?
Well, yeah, we have to put some rates of utilitarian and stuff. Only right.
So I think maybe burdens and benefit.
Yeah,
Well,
so
let's start with the ethic of care, right? We should go down the list, right? So for the ethic of care, there's not a whole lot here, right? It's not talking about personal relationships with people.
Well, I disagree. You're talking about, worrying about the people. You're worrying about, the relationships between these people and between their family due to, the negative impact it's causing on the community. Because community also has to do with relationship. It's a negative impact on the community. So I'd say that would be what you look at from the ethic of care, is that the community is suffering and this company's, they're not doing better, but doing that can be considered worse. Right?
It's just, the problem I have with it though, like I see what you're saying, but I feel like that's more the utilitarian standpoint. Because ethic of care is specifically looking at your relationships with individuals. And like, what is your responsibility to treat those people based on how they've treated you, right? And so, if we're looking from the perspective of the company, they have no personal relationships with any of the people. And you can make the standpoint that like they're consumers, they have some relationship with their consumers, and if that's the case, then you could say like women should be more focused on toilets. But the problem, I feel like it's a weaker way to, like it's there, but it's a weaker standpoint, you know what I mean?
I think it's definitely weaker. But I do think that is still valid.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a weaker standpoint, but the company caring about the people because, or like a lot of examples look at, you care about the people and the people care about your product. It boosts, the building of that relationship helps them in the long run.
Nothing says it has to be strong, but it is still.
Right, it exists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's how we look at it from caring. Next one is
Rights. So ethics of rights. So this, I feel like, has a bit more.
Yeah, well, the company, I feel like the company has a right to advertise.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But then the people
And the
also
consumers have a right to
sanitation,
choose what they want.
the right to information.
Yeah, and the right to information, which counts as the right to choose, right? If they don't know the option, you know, and how they can choose, so I'd say,
It doesn't necessarily counter, but it exists with it, it's needed before the right to choose. Well, see, I don't like that it's needed before the right to choose, right? Because if you say that the right to information is needed before you have the right to choose, that means that people don't naturally have the right to choose, which I think
yeah,
isn't exactly accurate. But I do think the right to information is like super important, right? Like, you can't make a super informed decision without information.
yeah.
So, yeah,
I think they flip flop around, they're hard, it's hard to state, so that's what I was saying, it's like, it kind of makes rights, you know, arguable from both sides. And so I don't think we can use rights kind of well here to kind of get to the best conclusion that we want to be at.
right.
Because it's too counterproductive in what you're protecting there.
There's so many like countering rights and
Yeah.
go against each other.
Now, justice.
Just- So this is, you know, basically, yeah, yeah, so it can be, so them not having toilets puts them with more burden. And the company is pushing toward,
And it's getting a lot of benefit from
Yes.
the purchase itself.
so it is creating that balance.
So they should distribute, like.
Distribute what their
Like,
profit towards the customers.
yeah,
Yeah. Which I think which works perfectly with what we're trying to get here. We're trying to get to that end result we decided was the best. So I think that pushes exactly towards it is the company's getting way more benefit than the customer is, and the customer's getting more burden because of that. And so that they lower their profit and their aggressive advertising, and maybe then get some information, yeah. And
So reduce that benefit and give themselves some burden of like, funding things for sanitation.
Yeah, they have
Like
to
what
take
you were
on
saying,
that.
that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Because then that gives the people more benefit from having a new sanitation.
Yeah.
And it reduces their burdens because they're reducing the marketing campaign. And then at the same time, it's doing the inverse with the company, reducing their benefits by reducing, profits.
Yeah, and I think
And
instead
increasing
of marketing premium cell phones, they could do ones that are more affordable.
Yeah, and I have no idea what
Based
the
on
marketing is like,
Yeah.
in like for India. It could just be normal, like, slow level cell phones. I have no idea, but I probably not.
I feel like I wasn't.
Yeah.
We're really getting into it there.
And well, and another point is how much is the advertisement, and how much is this word of mouth, and like needing a cell phone, and a cell phone being a part of modern day.
I was gonna say, like, how much are the cell phones actually a super, like, a requirement in India? Like, they probably are.
Yeah.
With how many
Probably
people there
are,
are.
yeah. It might be a cultural thing where cell phones are more needed than toilets. Or even with Africa, you know, having a cell phone to society, and you live in, you know, nowhere in a small village that doesn't have access to plumbing, because you're nowhere near a plumbing pipe. And that's kind of why I thought this one a little bit more muddy, because it's, yeah, but that. And then we can get to the final one, utilitarianism.
Yeah, I think we covered a couple, talking about justice, I feel like the burden benefits, the overall utility of having a toilet versus a cell phone. I don't know how.
So it's thinking of overall benefit of what the company can choose. So if the company chooses to continue, you know, they get profit. But overall to society, I would argue that it provides less utility. Because these people in India continue to not progress better. Where, yeah, with sanitation, which, you know, probably lowers, you know, X, Y, and Z. Yeah. And so, no, I think there is a utilitarian or argument you can make for the company continuing to make aggressive advertisement. I think there's just as much well, if they better this, this community, the utility of them getting better will benefit all better. And so I think we're in another situation, kind of like the rights, where you have two counterpoints together that kind of, nullifies it. So I think that one's gonna play less in ours.
I think justice is the real thing.
Yeah, I think
Our
justice is our
decision
main
justice
one.
is like our strongest point.
And then
I think
care is our
utilitarian,
secondary.
I feel like utilitarianism doesn't counter as much as you can find it in college.
There's utility.
As you find the better utility, and it can be argued that the benefit of people's society is better than the benefit of the company. So I would say that the option that helps the society more from a utilitarian standpoint is what's best. Because what helps the most people, which is going to be the people, like, let's just give over those people.
Well, it's not necessarily about helping the most, it's the best non-utility.
Right, which is for the most people usually. Because if you have more people, that's more.
Yeah, it is focused on more people.
So if because they were talking about how it could save 400,000 children's lives, right? And that's not even counting the amount of adults who could be saved, right? So that's extreme, like that's a large number for enough utility. So I feel like fixing the sanitation problem would be, from a utility standpoint, the best option. Because you're saving thousands of lives. Yeah, exactly, right?
Well, maybe the companies use that, they're providing the cell phones, is giving the utility to the population. They're providing them information where they can find information about sanitation and stuff.
Yeah, and seeing that's the other counterpoint I was thinking about is thinking is like, how much utility does a cell phone provide? And do cell phones provide more utility than toilets? That's, I don't know, it's a better economy, better than more life.
Yeah.
Which, complicated question.
Yeah, it's just utilitarianism usually goes with life, right? Yeah.
But, like cases in the oil rig where, it wasn't.
Yeah.
So, all right, yeah. So,
We can wrap this back.
yeah, well, let's so we don't run out of time.
All right, so depicting the resident.
So,
That's the question is,
this one's tricky, isn't it?
is it okay to exaggerate or lie on your resume, right? And so the biggest thing here that I found interesting, right? I was curious, so I looked it up. It is not illegal to lie on your resume.
Providing legal document.
It is not illegal because it is not a legal document.
Well, so my entire thing with this is, that's the point of the interview. Is the interview and the background check that they do beforehand is supposed to, just figure out if these are true or false. Every interview I have, I've been asked every question about everything I put on it. So I think they're at a little bit of a fault here. But the second thing is, I think there's only one thing on there that was an outright lie.
Is that the degree?
Yeah.
Because the school had no record that you went. The
Yeah.
University of Regions like, we have no record that you've been here.
Yeah, that was the only thing wrong, which I think is objectively wrong. Fully lying, I think is objectively wrong.
Yeah.
But the embellishing,
Like exaggerating, like that's a bit more of a gray area. Because saying like you take that fruit to the cake, technically that's working on the cake. Like,
yeah,
technically that is actually working on the cake.
yeah, he didn't lie about the other stuff. And, restart the Star Wars.
Sure, it's deceptive, but it's not lying.
It's deceptive, but it's not lying.
Like, if the firm had taken time to really look into what that was, they probably would
Yeah,
have hired
they-
the person.
Yeah.
Which I think is funny because this kind of relates back is they had the freedom of information.
Yeah.
Was he liable to give them the full information? Because, they had just as much chance to figure it out. He just provided them, with what he's trying to sell himself. Or they could have looked more into it, which is it's the same problem as, I think we just talked about this in class the other day. It's the same problem of the company, or like the drug company selling people stuff. It's like, yeah, they list the side effects, but they don't make it a variant, they'll tell you in person. Or, terms of service, that's the main one we talk about, terms of service.
But they don't really have a lot of time or resources unless they want to pay and to find out if it's true or not.
Okay.
They don't,
That's why I think,
they kind of rely on your honesty. But he could have asked, like, what specifically did you work on the cake? Like, oh, I think they're fruit. Oh, okay. Like, did he ask those questions?
Yeah. That's the question, is what does he interview?
Like, did they have that opportunity? Like, did they take advantage of the opportunity to learn from him directly? Or were they like, oh,
And
this guy's
you're right,
awesome?
he could have just straight out lied to them to their face. They could have been like, oh, where'd you work on the cake? He could have lied.
Yeah.
You are right there, and then, yeah, they would have to invest in, doing a full background check on this information.
well, see, I think that's where it shifts, right? If you lie, I think that's unethical. If you tell that you did something that you literally did not do, I think that's.
Yeah, I hope we're all agreeing with that. But
Yeah.
that's strong now.
Yeah.
But a big thing that I think, like, are you guys cool with moving options a little bit here?
Yeah.
So one of the big things that I talked about, it's kind of like one of my roommates I use, but we talked about how like resume is only so good, right? Like, what if you did something where, like, you don't have a contract? Because normally with these kind of things, you hire someone on a contract, right? Once you hire them, they're hired. You can't really do anything for a while. You can't just fire them out of the blue. Like with these show things, you have a contract. You can't just be fired off the show. Unless you do something like horrible. Like there's certain stipulations of contract that, like, if you kill somebody, you're not gonna be on the show.
Yeah.
But we talked about how, like, instead of having that contract at first, how about you hire them for a week and pay them for a week and see if they're the person that they say they are.
It's the probation period.
Right.
That's why a lot of contracts and a lot of companies want to have that probation period.
Yeah, and those
Or that
companies
this
tend to be more successful.
Yeah.
They tend to have the best hiring rates and the best turnover, like not like low turnover rates.
Yeah, general.
So because they don't count that first week for turnover.
Yeah.
So because then you're getting people who are more likely to be who they say they are, and you can see what kind of person they are for a week.
Yeah. Well, and probation periods often go longer. My last job, I think it was 6 months probation period where they could fire you with little to no reason. And so.
Yeah, that's a long period.
Yeah. But that's the thing is, I think at the end of this, there's a lot of blame to put on the company itself that hired, or the network that hired them. I don't think they're fully at fault though.
No.
And so, to rush it along, one time. So what would we think is the best choice? That from both the company and then the guy's perspective.
I mean, I don't think it was really the chief's fault that they didn't clarify the information, but they fired them. They should have, like, stuck to it to make a point, if that was the point they were trying to make.
Yeah.
I mean, he still obviously brought value to them.
Because the thing is like you fix the resume and then give it to them, and then they're like, okay, here's an interesting idea. Like, I feel like if I were to fire somebody, I would stick to that. I don't know.
And then,
Yeah.
I was gonna say, well, the other point is, what if somebody that was more qualified also put in their resume, but since they didn't embellish it as much, they didn't get hired, and they lost that opportunity forever. I think that's the other big one is, should everyone be expected to, embellish their resume to a large amount like he had?
Like, honestly, like, in this day and age, that's what it is. Like, you can look up on Google, like, easy way, like, ways to, like, change my job experiences to make it sound better. Like, if you search on Google, you're gonna find results. Like, a cash register, you can put down, handled monetary transactions for a multi-billion-dollar company. Like, technically it's true, but it sounds a much more,
Professional.
yeah, it doesn't sound like you were just.
A cashier.
Yeah,
Cashier, Walmart, McDonald's, right? Like,
yeah, and even if they, question you in an interview, just being brought into the interview raises your odds of being hired exponentially above the stack.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they find out like, oh yeah, I was just a cash register, just going there, still just.
and having a face-to-face.
Oh, exactly.
That's you as a person, not just a paper.
But it's a person and they've already interviewed you, so you're already an option. Compared to the stack, that's not an option because they've never been in.
Right.
So.
But yeah, it's just why I think it's like, what I personally think would be the best option.
But the counterpoint to that is, even though that is common, does that make it right?
Right.
Because that's, there's a lot of things that are common and are expected, but that doesn't necessarily make them ethically just.
But the problem is it not just though? Because if everybody is doing it, that makes it seem that it is just, because then the balance is equal.
Yeah.
So.
But is everyone doing it?
In most cases, and there's some people who don't, don't get me wrong, there are people who don't, but they tend to realize that it doesn't work, so then they start doing it. So I don't know, it could be easily be a problem, but that's why I don't think that resume should be your primary choice. I think resume should narrow a pool, so you should get a large pool of resumes. And there are certain traits that people might have that you don't want, so you get rid of those resumes. And then once you have those pools, you bring them in, you figure out, maybe narrow the pool a little bit more. And then you have this large pool that's like more people than you can really hire, but you have them work for a week. And then from there, you choose your best out of that week, and then those are your pools.
But do you realize how expensive that would be to do? Number two, do you realize how many new people? I mean, think about it. You started a new company, you're gonna have to get a computer log on. You're gonna have to get credentials. You're gonna have some place to work. All of those things. And if you do that every time you hire, that becomes an incredibly expensive proposition.
Mm-hmm. That's why you narrow quite a bit with the resume process. So you narrow a lot of traits, and then you narrow even more off of the interviews. So then I would say, like, say you get, I don't know, I'm assuming like a smaller company gets probably 200 applications, maybe a month. Is that a fair assumption for a small company?
Okay.
So you have those 200 applications, and then from the resumes, you can knock off maybe 50, maybe more. So you have 100 to 150 people, and then from the interviews, you narrow down to 25 to 50 people, and then those people you pay minimum wage for a week, and then see which ones you keep, and then you pay them.
I'm still gonna tell you that as a person who's sat on both sides of the hiring table, that is an incredibly difficult proposition.
Well, 100 interviews, you have to think, like an interview at least 30 minutes each.
And the number of people that are involved in that, it gets incredibly hard.
I've never worked in a company that's larger than that. Like I worked at Domino's, I performed interviews and I got through them in less than 15 minutes. So that's why I was just like, for me, interviews don't seem that bad, but like I'm assuming for a larger company, it's a lot.
It's a lot more involved.
Yeah.
A lot more involved. Okay, so we've got about 7 minutes left, so let's go through this really quickly. So group number one was dealing with the toilets and cell phones. What was your decision? What was your finding?
The cell phone company should distribute the benefits of their income to the burdens and needs of the toilet. And we kind of look at it from both justice and utility, because by saving the people that die every year due to sanitation, it could be potential customers, and it raises the well-being overall for both the company and the people.
Okay.
So.
All right. And then what about the resume?
We kind of found that at the end, like, the company had the right information where they could look into it, and the guy was qualified for the job, and embellishing was a common practice in resumes. We felt that the company's decision to fire him maybe been unjust.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to strongly disagree with you that just because that's the common practice, company policy is that misrepresenting yourself on a resume or anything else is equivalent to lying, which is normally a fireable offense. But the thing is that the truth of the matter is his qualifications had very little to do with what he actually did on the show, on the program. It was about, he was hired for his personality. This is entertainment, not we're hiring you to be the executive chef at such and such a restaurant. We're having you go into mom and pop places and tell them what they're doing wrong. I think most viewers could probably go into some of these places and tell them what they're doing wrong. So it's all about his personality, and his physical presence was as much the issue. And so getting rid of this was not germane to the job that he was doing. Okay, all right. So group, the online group, let's talk really quickly about the computer, or about the textbook. What did you guys decide about the textbook? Somebody, anybody?
We were looking at it from the ethics of rights, and with the conversation we had with you, ethics of care, because it doesn't seem very ethical for the professor, or I guess no, the English department in this case, to charge them extra for their vacation. So it's not caring for the student. And then in the rights perspective, you said there was a right prohibiting copyright and also a contractual right that the university had to like make them able to buy it without paying the extra or something like that. I don't remember.
Okay. Yeah, the contractual right is that if you're going to sell our textbook on your campus, you're going to sell it and not allow your students to buy a used copy of it. And if you want to keep selling our textbook, you have to agree to that contractual obligation, which the University of Alabama did. Okay, good. Let's talk about the rank and yank.
On that one, Deanne brought up a point about, like, what if a mother got pregnant during the workforce? She would have a incline on getting to that ranked in the bottom 10%. So we used, again, the ethics of care to argue that we should just get rid of that ranking system.
Okay, I'd also say that, for example, if we're talking about, remember, we talked about discrimination and affirmative action. Those are all rights discussions that would be germane to this. If we were to see, for example, that a large number of the individuals that were consistently put in the bottom 10% happen to belong to specific groups, such as women or minorities, we could make the argument that this is a discriminatory practice. If we also see, for example, that all of the people that are in the 20 percentile that are getting paid more happen to be white males, again, we could probably argue that there has to be some balance of the likelihood that the various groups that participate in the workforce should, if the things are being fair, should have probably representation in all three of those groups, the ones that are being fired, kept, and promoted. Okay, all right, folks, excellent discussion. Cool thing is that in class on Thursday, we're going to be able to just jump straight into this, and we won't have to spend as much time kind of covering this, okay? Please remember, the purpose of this is not just as a fun conversation, but to practice those, and I changed it on the language here, the 3 C's. Characterize, what's the next one?
Consider.
Characterize, consider, and choose. This is what your final exam is going to be. So bear in mind, this is practice for your final. Okay? All right, that's everything I have, folks. I will see you all later.